Well, Sophia Worringer, researcher and political commentator with Young Voices UK, is here on the line to go through some of these stories with me. Sophia, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
What do you think about the idea that the kind of strategies we use in terms of how we tackle smoking should be employed with our junk food?
I think it's very clear that Britain is increasingly a sick nation. And this context is important because those who are off work, not having requirements to seek work, are growing, and those numbers are driven by those who are ill. So it is a problem that we are smoking at high rates and, to put it frankly, too fat often. So I think this back to work agenda that the government is pushing is the right one. But whether the smoking ban will be as impactful as the Prime Minister hopes, and whether the impact will be the same if we cut junk food in terms of obesity is yet to be seen, I think.
Did this give you confidence that the Health Secretary was across it, where she said she wants to give people help and advice on how to be healthier in a way that is not nanny state-ish? What does that actually tell us she's going to do?
Not much. And I think people broadly know the help and advice on how to be healthier. I think it does need to go beyond just help and advice. People are obviously are often aware of what that advice would be, but yet it's difficult to follow the advice. That's the problem. So I think it needs to go beyond just guidance, but also we need to shift towards more people taking responsibility for their own health. That's quite difficult when you have an NHS that is free at the point of delivery and you don't necessarily see the consequences of actions, particularly related to health. So it does need to be about this wider agenda setting, and not necessarily guidance is not just going to get us there.
One of the big political debates that is ongoing is the status of the BBC licence fee that makes the front pages of several of the papers this morning. But the Telegraph says that the Prime Minister is going to say, I'm going to block a 9% increase in the BBC licence fee, saying that, the corporation has to be realistic about what the public can afford. Do you think that's the right decision?
I think it is, yes, because we need to put this in the context of whole public sector spending. We've just agreed inflationary pay rises for so many public sector workers, and that's good. But if their costs continue to increase, then they won't feel the impact of those pay increases. And things like the licence fee paid by so many is another example of how costs are just eating into what would have felt like a pay rise otherwise. And also the nature in which people consume media is shifting, I think. So those who maybe were typically BBC viewers have maybe moved to other broadcasters and other ways of consuming news. So just increasing costs continually at the BBC is not necessarily going to be sustainable when people's appetite and people's habits are shifting.
I think there's quite a lot of frustration, but obviously, not unsurprisingly, with inside the walls of the BBC, because that planned increase, if they did go ahead with it, that would be up by £15 a year. So we'd be paying £173 a year from April. Comes off the back of a 2-year freeze of the licence fee. So the BBC obviously looking at, the programmes they can make, the staff they can have. We saw about the cuts to Newsnight last week. Clearly, the level of programming and news provision they'll be able to give us will be reduced if they don't have that money, particularly considering inflation. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops. Keir Starmer made some comments over the weekend that have made now the front page of the Mirror about some of the politicians that he admires. And in that list, Mrs. Thatcher was in it. And that hasn't gone too well with some of his party, who say this seems like a very obvious attempt to try and woo over some Conservative voters.
Yeah, exactly. We know Conservative MPs and Conservative future leadership hopefuls love to reference Margaret Thatcher, but this was more surprising coming from the leader of the Labour Party. But I think it was a clever pitch. He knows that Conservative voters are unhappy on the record on Brexit and immigration particularly, but I think that it adds to the feeling that Keir Starmer doesn't know necessarily what he stands for, and he will say what is expedient. So I'm not sure it will play to his advantage quite as much as he thinks. It sounds like he's just saying what people are itching to hear.
Apparently Chris Kitchen of the National Union of Mine Workers said, I'm a former coal miner. I don't see anything Thatcher did that helped my community. Do you think it's a little bit unfair, this criticism?
I think that he again, I think he is, potentially pursuing something that he thinks is expedient. I think people are still very sore from what Thatcher did. It's something that it divides communities. So I think that he couldn't have picked a more divisive figure to try and win people over. But he's not necessarily trying to play to that typical Labour base at all. He almost maybe thinks he's got them in the bag. He's trying to play to the Conservative base, and that's where these comments are more surprising. But let's see if they pay off. I don't know if people will see through it as a flimsy thing.
Well, should we talk about controversial politicians potentially joining other parties? Inside the Times, in the politics sort of spread this morning, the headline is Sunak leaves the door open for Farage to rejoin the party. He hasn't ruled out allowing Nigel Farage to join after it had been suggested that Nigel Farage could rescue the Tories. I mean, can you really see this happening, Sophia?
I'm not sure I can see him rescuing them. I can see him joining the Conservative Party, and I don't think we should be banning anyone from joining a mainstream political party at all. So I think it's right in that sense that the Conservative Party is a broad church, and if Farage is interested in joining, then that's up to him, and that shouldn't be something that's off the table. And people forget that maybe they disagree with his politics, particularly in Westminster, but across the country, he's actually a fairly popular politician, and maybe his stint on I'm a Celebrity will make him even more relatable. So I think there's potential that he could join. Whether he will reboost their chances is a completely different question, and I'm more sceptical of that.
Have you watched him on I'm a Celebrity?
I have not, no, but it's impossible to escape clips of his antics circulating on social media and the like.
I think he's struggled because he thought he was going to be so hated that he'd be doing all the tasks, and he admitted, well, if you do the task, you get 25% of the airtime, but he's not been unpopular enough to be put up for all the tasks, so maybe it hasn't been the PR success he was hoping.
Interesting. Maybe he's not going to follow in Matt Hancock's footsteps after all.
Did you learn languages at school, and when did you sort of give them up?
Yeah, so I did my French GCSE. That was the end of my language career. I didn't take them any further, and I absolutely loved it, and I really enjoyed it. And I was told at the time that it was something that universities really loved, that you would have a GCSE in any modern foreign language and it would be advantageous to you. So I do think it's sad that those numbers are dropping, particularly in French and German, although Spanish is on the increase.
Yeah, well, what's really surprising is that the reason that GCSE pupils sort of are saying, look, they're not going to study a language is because they don't think it's going to help them in their career. It's sort of not about things, it's not concerns that saying, AI is going to take over the need for translation. I think they genuinely don't think it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, we always get put to shame, don't we, as Brits, when we go abroad and people speak English flawlessly, and maybe that's not even their second language, it's their third or fourth. So I think it's a shame if we are losing that capability and that's decreasing even more. And it's not just about the career benefits. Learning a language is also amazing for your brain development, and it uses part of your brain that other types of skills don't tap into. So I think there's a wider loss than just the career advantage that it can bring.
Yeah, and actually because far fewer of us are taking modern languages, actually some universities are saying we're struggling to keep our language courses running. I mean, sort of at A-level, the number of us taking French has halved in 20 years. And in terms of GCSEs, it's about a third of the number of people studying French now than before the government changed the regulations in 2003. So let me know, what did your sort of modern languages at school help you and put you in good stead with for the rest of your career? You can text me 87222, start your message with the word Times. Now, a word that wouldn't be in the language dictionary just yet is Riz. Sophia, have you got Riz?
I'm not sure I do, because I only learnt it this morning. Must confess it's not a word that I know well. But what's really interesting here is that it was the language that originated, I believe, from, or it was at least made popular from YouTube. And it shows the influence of that kind of social media influencer on our vocabulary, which is fascinating.
OK, so we both learnt it this morning. Riz means you're good at chatting up or flirting with potential partners. If so, you have Riz. I think you can actually It can be a verb as well. I'm not really sure how people use it. I've never heard anyone describe Riz. But according to the Oxford University Press, which publishes the Oxford English Dictionary, it's defined as style, charm or attractiveness and the ability to attract a romantic or sexual partner. So, Sophia, it seems to be sort of like an elevated version of charisma, but in a romantic sense.
Yeah, something like that. Not really sure, but I think also it's something that people aspire to. They want to have it, and it's about kind of your success on the dating scene too. So let's see how widespread this word becomes.
Okay, so to use it as a verb, you'd have to say to rizz up. So that means I'm going to sort of attract, seduce, or chat someone up. Sophia, I think it won't be that useful for you. I don't think.
Probably not something I'll be using every day now.
I can imagine. Final thing, in your household, Christmas Day, what is on the dessert menu? Christmas pudding apparently is somewhat falling out of fashion.
This is really sad. I'm absolutely a Christmas pudding person. Panettone, as the article is saying, that is replacing Christmas pudding as the popular item, is just not the same. I find it a bit nothingy, whereas Christmas pudding, it's dense, it's rich. You can have it with custard cream, ice cream, or all three. I think it's still a winner.
Sophia, thank you so much. Sophia, I really appreciate your time going through the papers with me this morning.